Hi, I'm author Robert Dugoni, New York Times bestselling author of the Tracy Crosswhite series. And today I'm going to talk to you about your first chapter, what I like to call one chance to make a first impression. Let's get started. The first thing I want to caution you is that this is not first draft stuff that I'm going to be teaching you. I'm a big proponent that when you're writing your first draft, you just let it go and you don't edit yourself. Anything you think is appropriate to that first draft, you put it in, and remember that first draft is for you and you only. No one else is going to read it, so you can fill it with whatever you need. This is when you start to edit. Okay, what are the things you're looking for in your novel that's going to help make it better? What are you looking for in that first chapter that's going to help make it better? And the first thing you have to consider is, what is your primary purpose as a novelist? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? And I hear all kinds of things. I hear that I'm trying to bring attention to this, or I'm trying to bring attention to that. The first thing you're trying to do is to entertain the reader, okay? You want the reader to be entertained. If you are entertaining the reader, then you have the opportunity to maybe persuade them, to talk about things, to bring up subjects. But primarily, you want that reader to pick up your book and immerse themselves in the story and in the character so that they can just experience the joy of reading. That's the first thing. The second thing that you're trying to do is you want to avoid all those things that interrupt that enjoyment. So if your reader is in the middle of a story, what you don't want to do is you don't want to start throwing in opinions. Very poorly concealed opinions that are actually your opinion, not your character's opinion, okay? And the reason is because 50% of those opinions might not be the opinion of the reader. You want to avoid things like biographies in your book. We've all been told, write a biography about my character. That's for you, the writer. That's not necessarily for the reader. What does the reader need at that moment to keep the story going forward? You want to avoid information dumps, okay? You've written that you've done a lot of research on the Winchester rifle, and gosh darn it, everybody's going to know that you did all that research, right? No. You did that research so that you could understand whatever the subject was that you needed to understand, so that you could make it real and believable for the reader. You could allow the character to live in that moment. So it can be information dumps about things. It can be information dumps about what the character's wearing. It can be a lot of different types of things. But you want to look for those moments in your novel where you're throwing in a bunch of information that the protagonist doesn't need at that particular moment. You want to avoid things like flashbacks. And this is that moment where everybody clutches their heart and says, oh my God, Dugoni says you can't have flashbacks in your novel. No, you can have flashbacks in your novel. But just remember what a flashback is, okay? A flashback is not a memory. It's not someone sitting and thinking. There's nothing exciting about someone sitting and thinking. What's exciting is someone in action. A character in action, a character speaking, okay? So sure, you can have flashbacks in your novel, but understand what a flashback is. A flashback is a scene. So all the things we're going to be talking about today about what makes a good scene, you want those to be in your flashback, okay? You want it to be external. You want the character to hear and see and smell and taste and be real, be alive, okay? You don't want it to be a character sitting and thinking. No matter how interesting those thoughts might be, it's never going to be enough to pull that reader in. And remember what you're trying to do in that first chapter, right? You're trying to pull them in. You want to bring them into your story, and you don't want to let them go. And all those things I just talked about, those author intrusions, those are moments when a reader can put the book down. And those are the things you want to avoid, okay? So entertain, first and foremost, entertain. Number two, you have to understand, what is a story? It sounds, kind of ridiculous, right? Well, I'm a novelist. Of course I'm writing a story. Are you? Are you writing a story? And in order to answer that question, you have to be able to understand, what is a story, okay? And the answer I like the most is, a story is a journey, okay? And I get that from Chris Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, okay? And the reason for that is because a journey in and of itself indicates movement, okay? So whose story is it? protagonist, right? It's primarily the protagonist story. You might have an antagonist, you might have other great secondary characters, but it's primarily that protagonist journey. It could be a romance. It could be a psychological journey. It could be a physical journey where they have to go and do something like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. There are a number of different kinds of journeys, but you have to at least think when you're looking at your draft, is my character on some kind of a journey? Is my character going to do something? Because what the physical journey really is the physical journey is the plot. I'm going to have my character do this and encounter this and do that and encounter this and on you go, okay? It's the plot for the protagonist. And some of you might be thinking, well, I have multiple protagonists. And my first response to that is going to be, do you? I mean, do you really? And if you look at this more analytically, can you really ask yourself, no, who is really your protagonist? Even in a romance, where you have a man and a woman, and romance writers will say to me, well, they're both protagonists, but whose perspective is it really coming from? Okay? Who is really the character that's going to be impacted the most? That's your protagonist, okay? So when you are writing a story, you are going to first and foremost going to write not just about ordinary people doing ordinary things. You're going to pick a protagonist who's an ordinary person doing something extraordinary, number one, or an ordinary person who is in extraordinary circumstances and has to act, number two, or you're going to write about an extraordinary person doing something extraordinary. You're not going to write about an ordinary person doing something ordinary. I could tell you all what I did this morning when I woke up to get here, and you would be bored to tears, okay? That's not what you want to write about. You want to write about that person that finds themselves doing something extraordinary or is in extraordinary circumstances and acts extraordinary. Now, what does that mean? Second type of journey. You have the physical journey and the emotional journey, or the spiritual journey, right? The spiritual journey, after many, many years of study and thinking about this, the spiritual journey or the emotional journey is the reason why your ordinary person is going to do something extraordinary. Okay? What is motivating them to act in an extraordinary way? Because most of us don't do that. If something happens in our family or to one of our loved ones, we call the police. We call the FBI. We call someone to step in and help us by doing their job. In a novel, that's not your luxury. In a novel, your character has to be the one who acts. Your protagonist is the actor. So why is your protagonist going to investigate this murder? Why is your protagonist going to do this surgery that no one else will do? Why is your protagonist going to teach these high school kids in a bad area of Los Angeles how to pass the AP calculus exam? Okay? So you have to have, what is their basic motivation? And I would say to you that rather than trying to come up with all these elaborate reasons why your character is going to act that way, go back to the basics. Why do we all act? What motivates us to act? And they're usually basic human emotions. Love. Right? Why does a character do something? They do it out of love. Greed. Power. A thirst for justice. Right? Honor. Duty. It's their job. My main character is a police officer and he's going to do his job, right? My main character is a soldier and she's going to do her job, okay? So it can be a number of different things. Jealousy is another one. Think of The Godfather, okay? The Godfather is a bad guy, but he's the protagonist. And we like him for a lot of reasons. Why does he act? Well, he acts out of love. He's throwing a party for his daughter who's getting married. He acts out of honor. All right? He is the man in town who has become protecting people. So look at this in a simplified fashion, okay? Ask yourself, what is my character's physical journey? And secondly, why are they doing that? If you can answer that second question, why is my character acting? And it's believable, the reader is going to believe you and they're going to follow you and they're going to move right along. So let's dive into that first chapter. Now, some of you are probably saying, well, how long should my first chapter be? Should I have a prologue, not have a prologue? Let's talk just first of all, your first chapter should be as long as it needs to be to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Sounds simple enough, right? So what is the point of that first chapter? What are you trying to accomplish? In other words, the first thing you want to do with that first chapter is you want to establish the tone. What type of book are you writing? Right? Now, if you're writing a romance novel, what should probably happen in that first scene, in that first chapter, right? Who should be in it? That's going to be different than if you're writing a mystery. If you're writing a mystery, a murder mystery, what's probably going to happen in that first chapter? Probably a murder, right? Or maybe it's the protagonist, the police officer. You might open, if you're writing a thriller, with an antagonist, because antagonists are interesting. Why are they interesting? Because a lot of times they're weirdos, right? They're people that do goofy things, that do horrible, nasty things. Think about Hannibal Lecter, right, in The Silence of the Lambs. So whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? Are you writing a horror book? Are you writing sci-fi? Are you writing fantasy? We should know immediately. We should know immediately when we open that book what we're getting ourselves into, because you as the author are going to establish the tone of the novel. You picked it up, you're reading a Western. You picked it up, you're reading a historical novel. You're going to make it clear so that the reader knows what they're getting themselves into. There's nothing that makes a reader more angry than when they think they know that they've picked up a fantasy book because that's what they love to read, and suddenly they're not reading a fantasy book, they're reading something completely different. So remember, establish the tone. What's the second thing that you're trying to do in that opening? What you're trying to do is introduce your protagonist, okay? Who are we going to go on this journey of 400 pages with? Who is this person? So you're going to ask yourself these questions. Who is the main character? What is the main character? Where is the main character? What does the main character want, desire, or need? And what stands in the way of that main character getting it? Okay? Tracy Crosswhite is a Seattle homicide detective who just wants to do her job. But she gets a phone call indicating that a body has been found in her hometown and it may be her sister. Tracy goes home to find out what the situation is, but the biggest problem is that a killer has already been convicted and is in jail, and Tracy doesn't think he did it. That's who my character is in the Tracy Crosswhite series. You can do this in almost anything. We open watching the movie Shrek. Who? Shrek is a lovable ogre who lives in a swamp and just wants to be left alone. But when the local ruler, the king, kicks out the fairy tale creatures, they come and live in his swamp. To get his swamp back, he has to go save a princess from a fire-breathing dragon. Okay? Simple. But we know who that character is. And knowing who the character is grounds the reader in your story. They say to themselves, I'm going to go on this story with this character. Similarly, the third thing that you're going to do is introduce the setting. Okay, where is this taking place? Why that? Because again, it's important to ground your readers. It can be on the planet Org, which doesn't exist. But if you make it real, the reader's going to feel grounded, right? I am on the planet Org, and the story is going to unfold here. It's just a great way to get the reader to feel comfortable in the story, right? Setting them in there. Now, if you don't know the area, right, you're going to want to learn the minute details that make that area real, okay? The third thing you're going to do after you have introduced your protagonist is you want to create some type of empathy for that character. Now, ideally, you want empathy. And empathy means that you want the reader to stand in the shoes of the character and feel what that character is feeling deeply inside of them so that they are emotionally moved. That's a tall order for any writer, right? That's a very tall order. So if we can't quite get to that level, can you at least make them sympathetic, right? How do you make a character sympathetic? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it, okay? For instance, let me give you again the example of The Godfather. This is a protagonist who does bad things. Why is he sympathetic? Well, think back to the movie and think about how brilliant those screenwriters were. Because what's the first thing that they show us in that movie? He's in his office at his daughter's wedding. He's a father. He has a daughter who he loves, and he's throwing her a wedding. Can you identify with that? I can. What's the next thing he does? He's granting favors to the people around him, and in comes the undertaker. And the undertaker is distraught because these men have raped his daughter, and he can't get any justice. And what does Don Corleone say? How come you never invite me into your home? And all of us go, ooh, he's powerful. That's another thing that draws us to him. He's powerful. And in the end, he says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of him. He's going to help this man, okay? He's got a heart. So we've made him sympathetic, and to some people, he will be even empathetic. Important thing. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to hook the reader and not let them go. Okay? Hook the reader and not let them go. Now, how do you hook the reader? You hook the reader with that opening sentence. That first sentence should grab them and hold on to them. Now, what's the best way to do that? Raise a question. Okay? If the sentence raises a question, what's the reader going to be looking for? The answer, right? They're going to be looking for the answer, so they're going to continue reading, which is really all you want, is you want the reader to continue reading your novel. So what type of sentences am I talking about? Let me read one to you. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of the Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk in Hobbiton. Does it raise a question? Or 5 or 6 questions? Does it set the tone of the story? Absolutely. We're in a fantasy, aren't we? It's a fantasy novel. Okay? Who are we being drawn to? Mr. Bilbo Baggins. Why is Mr. Bilbo Baggins interesting? He disappears. And when he disappears, right, he comes back, he's got money, he's got all kinds of things, but they're celebrating his 11st birthday. Who lives to be 111? How do they live to be 111? So there's all kinds of questions that come up immediately that hopefully the reader is going to continue to read to find out answers. And that brings me to my next point, which is someone interesting should appear right away. Now, does it have to be your protagonist? No, absolutely not. Not in the first chapter. It might be your antagonist for the reasons I talked about earlier. Antagonists tend to be interesting. It could be a secondary character like Mr. Bilbo Baggins, because Mr. Bilbo Baggins is not the main character of The Lord of the Rings. It's Frodo Baggins who's the main character. So why did they open with Bilbo? Frodo's not interesting at this point. He's just a hobbit living in Hobbiton. But Bilbo is interesting. And how do we know it? Listen to the very next sentences following that opening sentence. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for more than 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and he was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hills at Bag End were full of and stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. He's interesting, okay? So we've given the reader an opening sentence that's going to pull them in by raising a question and force them to look for an answer, and we've given them an interesting character that they can latch onto immediately. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the final things that you want to do in that first chapter to really capture the reader's attention. The next thing you want to do is you want to look at your opening and you want to make sure that your opening is external. And what I mean by external is your opening should have people that are speaking and acting and doing things. okay? You should think of it like a play on a stage, and you're in the audience, and the characters come out onto the stage, and you can see what they're seeing, you can hear what they're hearing, you can touch what they're touching, taste what they're tasting, smell what they're smelling. Everything is external, and you are immersing yourself in that story. Why? Because when you can get a reader to immerse themselves into the story, it's much more interesting for the reader to be experiencing something than to simply be a spectator watching it, okay? And by making it external to the protagonist, to the characters in the setting, you are allowing the reader to immerse themselves and to become part of the story, okay? So I'm a big proponent of an opening, right? Of an opening that is external. The last thing I want to talk to you about is creating tension, okay? You've all heard that your story, no matter what you're writing, should have some type of tension in it. You should have romantic tension. You could have psychological tension. You could have, mysteries that someone's in trouble, someone's in danger. There's all kinds of different things that you want to do, right? That's true. But here's a tip. Every scene should have tension in it. Like Stephen King in his book On Writing says, every sentence on every page should have tension in it. Okay, I'm not that good. But what I think you can do, what is possible, is you can have tension in every scene. How do you do that? Let's go back to the beginning. What did I say is the most important thing? Is you need to understand and know what a character, what your protagonist wants, needs, or desires in that scene. Now, it may be that they just want to have a magnificent birthday party and disappear, like Mr. Bilbo Baggins, right? That's all he wants in that scene. Because if you know what your character wants, then you can put an obstacle in the path of that want, that desire, or that need so that they can't have it. And if they can't have it, that's what creates the tension, because they have to work for it. So Mr. Baggins, at his party, slips on the ring and disappears. He's gone. He's going to make off and go off the world, except Gandalf is there. And Gandalf knows exactly what he did and confronts him in his hobbit hole and says, "You have the ring. You need to give it up. It needs to be destroyed." Okay? Now, Bilbo is too old to go forward, so who enters? Frodo. And now Frodo has a task, a high concept task, which is what the entire book is about. Will Frodo destroy the ring in the fires of Mordor? Okay? But it starts with that opening scene. You have to give your character in that opening scene some type of want or some type of goal. What do they want, need, or desire? And then take it away from them, and that's going to create tension. Don't confuse that with the ultimate goal of the story. Okay, I'll give you one other quick example. Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, the ultimate goal is, will she get home? But in between, there's all these other goals. Will she be able to get the scarecrow off of the post? Will she be able to get the Tin Man to move? Will she be able to make it through the jungle without encountering a lion, a tiger, or a bear? Will she get past the field of poppies? There's all these little tasks along the way which are her goal and her obstacle, which creates tension. And tension is what is going to pull your reader through that first chapter. It's going to make your first chapter a great first chapter. And they're going to keep reading your book. They're not going to put it down. And you're going to find yourself on the bestseller list. Thanks very much. It was a pleasure talking to you this morning.